40 years ago, the Green Bay Packers defeated the Kansas City Chiefs in the first Super Bowl. Mickey Mantle had just hit his 500th home run, and the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. 40 years ago, Temecula wasn't yet a city, and the area was miles and miles of rolling farmland known as Rancho, California. It was then that 7 families founded Rancho Community Church and called a young Steve Struikmans to be the founding pastor.
Well, this is where it all started. 1968, that's when Rancho Community Church was formed. Well, if you have a church, you have to have a pastor. And it just so happened that 4 of these families knew me from my youth. January 1969, they extended a call while Rayanne and I were in Holland, and we accepted the call. We moved here in May, and they said to us, if we accept this call, then by the time that we get here, they'll have a church building. And that's what you see right here. This is our first chapel.
With Steve's faithful leadership, the congregation outgrew the little chapel on the hill, and in 1980 a new worship center was opened. In 1991, the Christian Education Center and Rancho Community Elementary Schools were opened, providing a foundation to our vision of bringing the love of Christ to the youth of the valley.
In 1993, I was honored to have been selected as the youth pastor of the church I received Christ in, the church I grew up in. And my new wife, Jenny, and I, we served as youth pastors for 10 years. And it was an exciting time for the church under the leadership of Pastor Steve. Our church grew from about 600-700 to 1,400 on a weekend, and we outgrew the campus.
Every week, more and more people were drawn to God's work at Rancho. The church that was just 7 families when it begun had turned into 700 families worshiping God and learning from His Word together. And soon the campus seemed much smaller than it had originally.
We knew at the time that if we were going to continue to open our doors to the people who were moving into the valley, we had to relocate. Late 1999, we closed escrow on 53 acres in South Temecula, right here on Highway 79 South, and a project began that was the accomplishment of a dream well beyond our imagination.
Plans were drawn, submitted, and approved. Through the faithful giving of the congregation, land was purchased, and construction of the Highway 79 campus began. But while the church prepared for a transition to a new campus, an even larger change was taking place.
Here you have Pastor Steve and Rayanne Struikmans. For 33 years, they've been growing the church from 7 families to 700 families, filling this church on the Vallejo campus at the top of their ministry, just about to relocate the church to this dream campus. And that's when Steve decides he needs to hand off the leadership to somebody else.
And through prayer and sharing, and we just began to realize more and more that Pastor Scott was our man.
In January of 2005, the elders had a retreat, and they invited me to come and just sort of interview me for this new position. And it was the first time we had even talked about this idea in the elder board with me in the room. And after that meeting was over, I went back to my room, and then they called me back at about midnight. And as I got into the conference room, they said, "We have unanimously voted you as the next senior pastor of Rancho Community Church." I wasn't prepared for that. I broke down in tears. I could barely believe what was happening. I was honored. And one by one, the elders prayed for me, Pastor Steve right along with them. And that was one of the greatest joys of my life, certainly the greatest joy in ministry. And in March of that year, just a few months later, I was installed as the new senior pastor. And Pastor Steve literally handed me a baton during that ceremony, and I still have it today with a wonderful engraving of God's Word on it, and just to remind me to keep preaching and teaching God's Word.
On September 18th, 2005, now led by their new pastor, the families of Rancho Community Church made the journey from Vallejo to their new house of worship at 31300 Rancho Community Way. Though the spirit of change was in the air, they brought with them the rich heritage of that little church on the hill.
To
We're taking the heritage that was built through the ministry of Steve and Rayanne Struikmans. We're taking the value of teaching God's Word, of ministry happening in the church, not from top down, but bottom up. What is God doing in the congregation? And we want to get on board with that. Building strong families, serving our community. We want to continue that heritage today, the same heritage that founded this church 40 years ago.